This is True Crime Out Loud.
I'm your host, B.
And I'm your host, Jen. This week's case is a listener recommendation from Kelly Williams. I got a message that the nurses at the Putnam County, Tennessee Health Department are avid listeners, and I wanted to tell them thank you, and thank you for making sure everyone is getting their COVID vaccine.
This week's case is a little different than normal. We usually start with a location, and the location for this one is the middle of the ocean, I guess. This week's case actually takes place on a cruise ship, and it's the case of Amy Bradley. And Amy Lynn Bradley was from Chesterfield County, Virginia, and she was born May 12th, 1974. An avid high school athlete, she lettered in 5 sports. She attended college at Longwood University and actually did that on a basketball scholarship. She was described by her friends as friendly, outgoing, and a fireball. She was 23 years old in March of 1998. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Bradley family. So we talked about Amy Bradley, and her parents are Ron and Iva Bradley, and her brother's name is Brad. In 1998, the family went on a Caribbean cruise on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, Rhapsody of the Seas. Ron's employer had gifted them the family cruise. The ship itself, Rhapsody of the Seas, was a newer ship. It had first launched for cruises in 1997, and it had 12 decks and about a 2,400 passenger capacity. So the Bradley family's cruise was set to start in San Juan, Puerto Rico on March 21st, 1998, and would first travel to Aruba, then Curacao, St. Martin, and St. Thomas before returning to San Juan, Puerto Rico the following Saturday on March 28th of 1998. And it did depart Puerto Rico and went to Aruba, and the ship then left Aruba and headed towards Curacao on March 23rd, 1998.
So let's talk about March 23rd. That's the third day of their family cruise, and the entire family went to this party they were having on the upper deck of the ship. And if you've ever been on a cruise, they will have planned parties. Hey, we're having a luau party, or we're having a disco party. They have different kinds of parties and events. So the family is all there, and Ron and Iva decide, hey, party's over. We're going back to our cabin and we're going to sleep. Well, Amy and her brother Brad continued to stay at the party and dance and socialize, and then they went to the ship's disco. And at the disco, the ship's band, the Blue Orchid, was playing. Amy was dancing around, and she even danced with one of the band members. And people say they seemed to be friendly with one another, like they had spoken to each other and met each other on the ship. Brad decided to go back to the room around 3:45, and he said Amy returned to the room at about 4 a.m., 4:15, 4:30 at the latest. And this is the early morning hours of March 24th. Brad and his sister Amy sat on the balcony of their cabin and just chatted for a while. The parents were in bed, and I guess they didn't want to disturb them. Brad said he didn't stay on the balcony very long, and then he went to bed. Amy said she was going to stay out there and get some fresh air, so he leaves Amy alone on the balcony. Now, it's reported that Amy had not been drinking heavily, which comes into play here. Well, around 5 or 5:30, Ron, Amy's father, woke up and he saw Amy sleeping on the balcony. And he said he could kind of see from her hips down, and she was resting comfortably. And the door leading from the cabin onto the balcony was closed. So he goes back to sleep. He said he woke again around 6 a.m. and he is not sure what woke him up, if it was a noise or something, but he awoke at 6 a.m. And at this point, he saw Amy was no longer on the balcony, and then the door from the cabin to the balcony was now open around 14 to 16 inches. He thought it was unusual for Amy to be up that early in the morning, especially since they had had a late night, but he thought she had probably gone up to the main deck to take photos of the sunrise or to get coffee, so he went up to meet up with his daughter. They later discovered that Amy has changed her clothes and she left behind her shoes that she had been seen wearing, and her cigarettes and lighter were missing. Well, Ron goes to look for her, and he cannot find her anywhere. He goes back to the cabin around 7 a.m., so this is an hour after he awakes and has been looking for Amy. He wakes up his wife, Iva, and tells her, I can't find Amy. Well, they immediately go to the purser's desk to get help.
For any listeners who haven't been on a cruise, the purser's office is kind of like the help desk and cashier, and they are just the general helpline for the ship. And you can go to them and make payment arrangements, purchase excursions, or any general question that you need help with. Pretty much everything goes through the purser's office.
So by the time they get to the purser's desk, they had arrived in Curacao, and the parents of Amy begged them, hey, don't lower the gangplank and don't let people off the ship because our daughter's missing. And they begged them, make an announcement, because if she's on here, she'll come, or if people see her, she'll come, and don't allow passengers to disembark. Now, the family says the cruise ship said they didn't want to make the announcement because they didn't want to disturb the other passengers this early in the morning. And according to the family, they finally made the announcement for Amy around 7:50 a.m., but by this time, most of the passengers had disembarked the ship. There was still no sign of Amy. So they speak to the captain of the ship. I mean, they are in full panic mode at this point. The captain tells them, okay, we're going to do a thorough search of this ship and look in every nook and cranny. It was even suggested to the family that, hey, maybe Amy got off the ship, went to get cigarettes or something along those lines. So the family goes off of the ship and they begin looking around Curacao for Amy.
And I think this is kind of interesting. I don't know how it was in 1998, but all the cruises that I've ever been on, there's a very rigid procedure for disembarking and then getting back on the ship. It would be difficult for a passenger to get off of the ship. Modern day, we're speaking. It would be difficult for a passenger to get off the ship without the crew knowing. Jen and I have been on several cruises and they scan your card. And I mean, because obviously they need to keep up with who's getting off and who's getting back on. And I'm sure that they had to have had some type of accountability system.
Well, I know I went on a cruise years ago. It wasn't 98. It was around 2000, 2001. And you didn't have the electronic verification that you do now. You know, you showed them your boarding pass and paperwork and you got off the ship and then you had to have it to get back on. I don't remember there being any kind of electronic method to keep up with who's entering and exiting.
Yeah, and I guess the first one that I took was probably around 2004 or 2005, and those systems were in place by then. You would not be able to get off the ship and get back on without showing the cruises that we take, like your sail ID or whatever, the little card that they give you that does everything on the ship.
Well, the one that I went on, like I said, it was around 2000, 2001. It was a Royal Caribbean, and I don't remember. I mean, there could have been, and I just don't remember it, but I seem to think it was paperwork because I remember having to carry a bag to carry all our paperwork in.
A little bit about Curacao. It's a Dutch island in the southern Caribbean. It's small. It is off the coast of Venezuela, and it has a population of around 163,000. It's 171 square miles, or 444 kilometers. Gorgeous waters and beaches like much of the Caribbean, and obviously they rely very heavily on tourism for the bulk of their income. So the family has disembarked because they want to make sure that Amy has not gone into the port at Curacao to get cigarettes or shop or do whatever it is that tourists do. And they returned to the ship that evening about 5:30. And they are told by the captain that a full search was conducted and that Amy was not on board the ship. Now, the ship's crew suggests that Amy may have committed suicide by jumping from the ship. And we know that this is a real phenomenon. And if it happens at night off of a cabin balcony, there would be very little chance that anyone would spot you and be able to turn the ship around, which would be very difficult to do even if they know you went into the water at that point. The crew also suggested that Amy could have fallen from the ship accidentally. Again, if we're leaning over the rail of the balcony, either on purpose or by accident, we run the risk of falling over the balcony. The family reported that Amy was a strong swimmer, a trained lifeguard, and a swim team coach, but more importantly, Amy was afraid of the ocean and open water. When they were on the ship, Amy would not walk up to the railing and look out over the ocean. Her dad and her brother had convinced her to do this with them holding on to her. That was the only way she would look over the railing on the, down the side of the ship, which is a neat view, but it is a little unnerving, especially if you're not good with heights or open water. But she did that with her dad and her brother holding on to her, so they think that it would be very unlikely for her to accidentally or purposely jump from the ship.
Yeah, and I'll also have pictures on our website, and if you're listening on YouTube, you'll see them pop up, of an actual Royal Caribbean cabin and the balcony, so you can see that these railings are pretty high on the balconies, because they probably take into account the safety of people and children and intoxication.
The family was told that they could stay on the ship and continue to the next port. The ship is on a tight time frame, and usually your stay in a port is 1 day and not like a whole 24-hour period, maybe an 8 to 12-hour period. And so the crew told the family, hey, you guys can go on the ship, stay with us and go to the next port, or stay in Curacao and continue to look for Amy. Now, if Amy is on board, they could notify them in Curacao that they had located her on board the ship. But if she were in Curacao and they found out, they would not be able to turn the ship around and drop the family back off in Curacao. And this puts the parents in a horrible position, because they either have to leave or stay, and either way they could be missing Amy. And the family made a difficult decision and decided to stay in Curacao, and I think that would be very tough. So after Amy went missing, and the ship's crew conducted a in-depth search of the entire ship, obviously the authorities are going to be notified in Curacao, and the Royal Dutch Marines conducted a 3-day ocean search of where the ship had been in an attempt to locate Amy. And that ended on March 27th, and they basically concluded that Amy fell or jumped from the ship. Royal Caribbean chartered a boat to continue looking for Amy through March 29th. But the ship was relatively close to the shore and not in open, dangerous waters at the time Amy went missing. Royal Caribbean also hired searchers and search parties to continue conducting searches of that area, and there were no signs of Amy. The family contacted the FBI, and the FBI did not get back right away, but when they did, they told the Bradleys that they had been in touch with the ship and that they had only searched the common areas and restrooms and not the full search that they had told Iva and Ron. So that's a piece of interesting information. An entire search of the ship would mean going into everyone's cabin, all of the storeroom. I mean, there are hundreds of areas of this ship that they would have to check. The Bradleys and the FBI meet up when the ship docks in St. Thomas, the next stop, and Iva confronts the captain about what he had told her and what was actually done. So the mom is obviously distraught at her daughter being missing, and so she confronts the captain and says, hey, the FBI has told us that you guys didn't conduct the thorough search that you told us you would. And the FBI then conducts a search of the ship on March 26th, and they did an extensive search. Iva said they called it a bomb search. So basically, they looked in small corners everywhere on the ship that a package could be. And not only were they looking for Amy, but they were checking every area that even a package could be. That's why they called it a bomb search. By this point, they determined that Amy left the room after changing clothes with her room key, cigarettes, lighter, and $100 in her pocket. Amy also had a unique tattoo of the Tasmanian Devil, the cartoon character, on her shoulder, and a Chinese symbol on her ankle, also a tattoo of a blue gecko around her navel.
And that Tasmanian Devil tattoo, her mom says that Amy actually designed it. It's the Tasmanian Devil spinning a basketball. So it's a very unique tattoo. So there are witnesses to seeing Amy on the ship. So when Ron and Iva and Brad get back on the ship, a college-age girl comes up to Iva and says, I saw Amy about 5:45 a.m. on March 24th, the day she went missing. And this woman or young lady had met Amy on the cruise ship, and so she recognized her. She said Amy was on the same level as her and her friend, but Amy went a floor up and then turns and goes toward the nightclub. Now, this woman says that Amy was accompanied by one of the ship's band members, Alistair Douglas, who also goes by the name of Yellow. And this is the same man they saw Amy being friendly with in the nightclub. This witness says that Yellow went up with Amy, and then about 10 minutes later, he returned, but was without Amy. Brad, Amy's brother, said he also remembers that morning when Amy was discovered missing. It was still early morning hours, and an announcement had not been made yet. Yellow approached him and told him he was sorry to hear about his sister. Now, the family says that only the captain and the security team knew Amy was missing.
And I find this real hard to believe because the crew, I mean, they're basically like a family on the ship. So if the security team knows they're missing and the security team's beginning to look for her and all this, they're going to mention it to other crew members. I think word of mouth is going to travel very, very quickly. So, because it's not something you would want to keep a secret anyway, right? If we couldn't find somebody, you would want the entire crew to know pretty quick that we're looking for this person. Security team's walking around. Bartender says, "Security guy, what are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm looking for this girl that's missing." I mean, it's going to travel quick.
I think so too. Well, the FBI, they questioned numerous passengers and the crew, and they even brought a polygrapher on board the ship. And Yellow was given a polygraph and questioned. The FBI said that they didn't have enough evidence to detain him. Now, the family reported that his polygraph was inconclusive, and they said when he exited his interview and polygraph, he gave a thumbs up to other band members. Now, this infuriated Amy's dad, which I can understand, him being upset about that. I couldn't find information where it was confirmed that his polygraph was inconclusive or the results of his interview, other than there was not enough evidence to hold or charge him with anything. He did tell them, though, that he and Amy parted ways somewhere around 1 a.m. Now, as far as him coming out and giving the thumbs up to his band members, he's being questioned about a missing woman. If he's innocent, he has nothing to do with her going missing, it's like, oh, I'm relieved, I did okay. If he has something to do with it, it's like, hey, thumbs up, they think I had nothing to do with it. So that could be taken numerous ways.
The guy's a young band member on a cruise ship. I mean, it was probably in poor taste, but it doesn't indicate.
One other strange event is the disappearance of all of the ship's photos of Amy. And like we said, if you've never been on a cruise, you are going to have your picture taken. There are photographers for the cruise line walking around everywhere. They take your picture. They are even set up just to take your picture as you randomly walk by. I mean, you have pictures made everywhere. Now, in an interview with Amy's mother, and she was interviewed several times on different media outlets, and in all of her interviews, she said these photos were missing the night before Amy went missing. They go to the photo gallery, and it's just a big gallery, and you can look at the pictures and decide which ones you want to choose from to purchase. And they said that night Amy's were missing. I could not find confirmation other than from Amy's mother, but if it's the case and they were actually missing the night before, that is very weird. Or maybe her picture wasn't taken. I don't know. Just something weird to note here. We know that photos of her on the cruise ship exist. There are photos, and I'll have them posted on our website. There are photos of Amy and her brother and Amy with her family, and they were taken by the ship's photographers. So we do know there are photos of her. They're just saying the night before she went missing on the 23rd is when there were no photos in the gallery. Now, the FBI, we have these witnesses. They say that the problem with witness time frames, it's not always accurate in general. Like if I were to ask you, what time did you have breakfast on Friday? You most likely couldn't answer that. Or on Saturday, if you're not in a regular routine and it's a day off from work and you're out on a cruise ship, your time frame is not going to be exact. It's not exact anyway, but even more so when you're on vacation. And you're on a cruise ship. You're traveling out of your time zone. So everybody comes from different time zones, and staying up in the early morning hours is going to throw off your time frame anyway. It's your natural perception of time. So what they say is that time frame from 4 a.m. when Amy returns to the cabin until 7 a.m., it's really not known the exact times and the locations of Amy. Now, there was a ship videographer taking video in the ship disco on the night of the 23rd into the 24th. And remember I said Amy was seen dancing? Well, there is actually a video of Amy dancing with Yellow, and this is the last known footage of Amy. Amy did not appear overly intoxicated in the video, and it was reported again that she had not been drinking heavily. She had drank some earlier in the night and had slacked off, I guess, to kind of bring herself down. But this video does exist, and I have a still shot from the video on our website. It was suggested that possibly Amy committed suicide, like I said earlier, but after speaking with family and friends, the FBI said this did not seem very likely. She had just graduated from college. She had just got her own apartment. She had a new dog. She also had a new job waiting on her once she returned home. She had no history of depression or anxiety or any mental health issues. Now, the other theory was that she accidentally fell overboard. But again, they were close to shore in calm waters. And along with that fear of her getting near the railing, she had not been drinking heavily. And nobody saw or heard anything. They deemed it very unlikely that she chose to disappear of her own accord, just to go off the grid. The family did not believe these theories. They just knew something nefarious had happened to Amy. Now, I read an article, according to the New York Times, crimes occur more often on cruise ships than we know of. The cruise line is trying to protect their reputation, and most are not within the confines of U.S. law. So you have sexual assault, theft, drug smuggling, and a few other crimes that occur that may not be reported as often as we think they should.
So nearly a month after Amy went missing, on April 21st, 1998, Ron and Brad go back to Curacao to continue to search for Amy. And they hand out flyers and talk to everyone that they can. A taxi driver said he saw Amy the day she went missing, that she ran up to his cab and asked where she could find a phone. He reported that she seemed to be in distress, and he noted that he remembered her green eyes. So Ron and Brad, when they're returning home, they're on a layover in Miami, Florida, and they get a phone call from Iva. And Iva says that the police in Curacao have located human bones that they believe belonged to a female, and they thought it might be Amy, but it would take them a few days to confirm. And so they called back, and it was determined that the bones were not Amy's, and they weren't even female. It was a partial spine and pelvic bone of a male. The Bradleys go back to Virginia, still not having located Amy, and they immediately start doing media interviews and created a website. They did anything and everything that they could to get her name and face in front of as many people as possible. They even managed to raise a $200,000 reward. And rewards are a tricky thing, because rewards can help ferret out some good tips, but they can also generate some wild goose chases, and sometimes people with good intentions that are more thinking about the money, maybe they don't see what they're really seeing. So I think it's important for the listeners to know that a reward can be the break in a case, but can also kind of muddy the water, so to speak. And so after offering a reward, they start hearing about sightings. In May of 1999, Amy's story was featured on America's Most Wanted, and a businessman in Canada saw the story. And he said that he wasn't interested in money from the Bradleys, but he wanted to give them information. He said that he was on a scuba diving trip in Curacao and believes he saw Amy in August of 1998. She was on the beach walking with two men on either side of her that were kind of walking a little behind her, almost like they're watching her. He said that when the woman he saw heard him speaking English, she kind of picked up her pace as if she was trying to get to him to talk to him. the two men caught up with her and took her into a cafe. Now, this gentleman said he was 100% sure that this was Amy. He said he was only about 2 feet from Amy, and then later when he saw her story, he knew that it was her that he had seen. He even identified the Tasmanian devil tattoo on her shoulder and a scar on her shin.
So after this reported sighting, in the fall of 1999 enters Frank Jones. And the Bradleys get an email from Frank, and he describes himself. He was a U.S. Army Special Forces officer, and he had recently gotten some information from a witness that Amy was being held by armed men in Curacao. He says he has a team. It's comprised of ex-Army Rangers and ex-Navy SEALs who specialize in recovering people. Now, Jones sent some of his men to interview this witness, and they reported Amy was being held by armed men. He then had his men set up surveillance, and they saw Amy in a dark green SUV with the people that were holding her captive. Now, Frank Jones explains this to the family, and he says this is a very dangerous situation, and he's going to help them get their daughter back alive, and of course it's going to cost some money. So they give Jones money to help try to recover Amy and keep up with her location. Now, Jones tells them they were forced to leave Curacao about a week after they arrived because someone had tried to attack them and shot at them. Jones constantly stayed in contact with the Bradleys and would tell them of sightings of Amy, and he said when it was clear and when he could get his men in the proper position, he was going to try to rescue Amy. And so he's going to send his men back to Curacao. Jones told the family that eventually the time had come and his team was going to be able to rescue Amy. He told the Bradleys, I'm going to need some more money to pull off this rescue because it's going to be very dangerous and I'm likely to lose men trying to pull this off. He told the Bradleys, okay, you guys go to Miami. You have a plane on standby to pick her up, and Ron's employer arranged for a jet to get Amy out of there. But the Bradleys said, hey, before we send you money, we want some type of proof that you're legitimate and what you're telling us is the truth. Well, it took Jones some time, but he was able to provide them with a photo of a woman who very much resembled Amy. She was sitting on a beach, and at least 2 of her tattoos were visible. And you could see the Tasmanian devil on her shoulder and a symbol on her ankle. And there was a towel kind of thrown over her shoulder, and she's sitting with her back to the camera. And there is a large blonde man standing next to her, and it kind of looks as if this guy is guarding her. So the Bradleys send the money to Jones for the rescue, and the Bradleys go to Miami. The Bradleys are in Miami, and they wait for nearly a week, and then they finally get the call from Jones, and it's an emotional time. They're waiting to hear on their daughter. Now, Jones tells the family that he had been fired upon again. One of his men was injured, but they still had surveillance on Amy, so just hold on to Miami, and we're going to get her. The same day, the Bradleys get a call from one of Jones's men, Tim Buckholz. Tim told the family he had begun to doubt what Jones was telling him and what he was telling the family, and it was confirmed that day when Jones made that call to the Bradleys. Tim said he was sitting next to him in a bar, and they were having drinks, and nobody was looking or watching Amy. Now, Tim said at one point he had been ordered by Jones to watch the home where Amy was being held captive, but he never saw any signs of Amy. He then realized that the people in the home were just average people and they were not holding anybody captive. One member of the team wound up admitting that the beach photos of Amy was staged and it was taken in Pensacola, Florida. And this team member was the man in the photo. Jones had taken photos of Amy's tattoos to a tattoo artist and had them stencil these tattoos on another woman, and it's the woman that was used in the photo to try to look like Amy. Well, by this point, the Bradleys had sent Jones over $200,000. About $24,000 was from their own pockets, and the other was from a missing person organization and donations. Jones had never served in the Special Forces, and everything he told the Bradleys was fake. Well, in February of 2002, he was charged federally for fraud, where he pled guilty and he was sentenced to 5 years in order to repay the money. Now, this witness that originally reported that Amy was being held captive, well, it was discovered that this witness was also a fraud, and the Bradleys had paid her around $8,000. And as my sister likes to say, this Jones guy, there's a special place in hell for him, because he put the family through this for 2 years. I mean, they were devastated, and they said it wasn't about the money at all. They would have paid any amount to get their daughter back, but they lost 2 years in their search for their daughter.
Yeah, and I think sometimes these victims' families are so, I don't want to say blinded, but I guess the desire to find their family is so strong that they overlook some very clear, troubling signs. I mean, any of these, we need more money to do this, we need more money to do that. Oh, we're so close to getting them. And even the picture, as a rational person not emotionally involved in the case, I think a person might sit back and say, hey, all right, let's assume for a minute that someone has kidnapped this girl for whatever reason, sex trafficking, whatever the reason is. A woman that's been kidnapped for sex trafficking, is she being guarded? Is she being taken to a beautiful beach and sitting there overlooking the ocean while being guarded by one of her captors? I mean, real life just doesn't work that way. I mean, if that was the situation this woman was really in, she would not be going to the beach with a bodyguard. It just wouldn't happen that way.
Well, and as Iva Bradley said herself, and I think this is key to it, you can't overlook any tip. You can't overlook any lead, because it could be the one thing that gets them Amy back. And they're doing everything they can. They don't care what they have to spend or what they have to do.
And that's true. But I wonder, it would be interesting to know what the FBI's take on Frank Jones was from the beginning.
Well, I don't know. I couldn't confirm anything, so I'm not going to make any assumptions here.
So in May of 2002, a U.S. Navy officer contacted the Bradleys, and he said that he had seen Amy in a brothel in Curacao in late 1998. Now, obviously, he's a U.S. Navy officer and was not supposed to be in the brothel, so he didn't report this at the time, for fear of repercussions against his career, and he waited until he was out of the service. He described her tattoos, and she told him that her name was Amy Bradley and she needed help. When he saw her story on TV, he realized that, that was the woman he had seen. The FBI went to that location, but this is approximately 4 years after the sighting of Amy, and the brothel had burned down. In March of 2005, a U.S. woman who was visiting Barbados, which is another island off the coast of Venezuela, said that she was in a women's restroom and 2 men entered and began having a conversation. And this scared her. Obviously, there's 2 men that have entered the women's restroom. And so she kind of huddles up in the bathroom stall to hide from them. And she heard one man tell the other that this was his deal, what time he needed to be there, and don't mess this up. When they left, she exited the stall and there was a woman standing at the sink. The woman seemed to be in distress, and she had brown hair and appeared to be in her early 30s. The woman was talking quietly, but when this woman asked her where she was from, she said Virginia. The woman then asked her name, and this mysterious woman replied with Amy. The witness told this woman that she had a daughter named Amy, and the woman began walking towards her as if she was trying to get the witness to quiet down. The witness provided a description, and it resembled Amy Bradley, but with longer hair. In 2005, the Bradley family received 2 photos of a female that had come from an adult website in the Caribbean advertising prostitution. The photos showed the woman barely clothed and in a sexually provocative pose, but she looks distraught and somewhat scared. The photos looked like Amy, but with longer hair. So the Bradleys took the photo and had it analyzed by an expert who now works with the FBI, and this guy said that he would bet his career that the person in this photo is Amy. He said her multiple piercings in her ears and her hairline and her facial structure all matched up.
Yeah, and I have photos again, like I always say, on our website, and if you're watching YouTube. And to the untrained eye, like somebody who is not an expert, this looks exactly like Amy Bradley, but with wild hair. I mean, it is uncanny how much it looks like her. You have to see these pictures.
Well, the FBI tried to trace the location of the website and who was publishing it, but they were unable to, as often is the case with internet-based things.
Here's what the FBI says, and I mean, this is a crazy case. There's no evidence to support that she fell overboard. There's no evidence to support suicide. There's no evidence to support foul play. There's no evidence she chose to disappear on her own. There is no evidence of anything. Now, the FBI is still offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to the resolve of the disappearance of Amy Bradley. Let me give you a description of her as she was when she went missing. According to the Charlie Project, she was 5'6", 120 pounds, brown hair, green eyes. She was possibly wearing a white scoop neck t-shirt, maroon shorts, or possibly jeans. She had a men's silver watch with a blue face on it and a silver college class ring. She smokes Marlboro cigarettes, drinks Coca-Cola, and Miller Lite beer. Now, Amy was legally declared dead in absentia in March of 2010, and this was 12 years after she disappeared. But, of course, her family is still holding out hope that someone knows something and can bring their daughter home. I mean, even if that is to bring her remains home, they want to know something. The family firmly believes that she was kidnapped as part of sex trafficking. And I'm going to tell you, I hold my opinion out on this because originally when I saw this story, I was like, she fell. I don't think she jumped. She fell. But after going back and researching this and reading it, I don't know what happened. I don't have an opinion as to what happened. Those pictures are very convincing.
Well, we also had one picture that was convincingly faked by somebody as well. So, and the listeners know that I tend to stray towards the simplest, most direct solution is usually what happened, and that's because that is a real phenomenon. What we think probably happened is, in fact, probably what happened. I think that she probably did fall overboard by accident. I think if she was going to commit suicide, and this is just my opinion, I think if she was going to commit suicide, there would have been aspects of her life that people could point to as problematic. Trouble with a boyfriend, trouble with school, trouble with work, or whatever. But by all of the accounts of her family, she had a happy life and was preparing for the future. As far as falling over the edge, I mean, you could have a little bit of alcohol and lose your footing. You could have no alcohol and lose your footing. And after reviewing this case, I never have bought she was close to shore. That doesn't matter. If she fell off of a balcony on one of these ships, this is a 12-deck ship, so she may have fallen conservatively. If she's halfway up the ship from the waterline, she may have fallen 50 or 60 feet. And this wouldn't be like diving 50 or 60 feet. This would be like falling 50 or 60 feet, which means that you could very likely not be conscious when you hit the water, and then it wouldn't matter how strong a swimmer you were. But even if you play it out a little further and you say, okay, she fell over the edge, well, she's a strong swimmer and we're close to the shore. After a fall of 50 to 60 feet, even if you were still conscious, even if you only had a 500-yard swim to the shore, okay, if the boat's docking, how quickly is it covering 500 yards? It doesn't matter. It's still a fall into open water. It's a horrible case for the family, and I hope that they're correct, obviously. I mean, it would be great if this person surfaced and, she's rescued from this terrible situation. Unfortunately, I also know that a lot of times victim families are just unable to accept that most direct, most probable answer. And throughout my career, I have seen this firsthand when it is apparent to everyone else involved as to what happened, and the family just can't. It's hard. It would be very difficult for someone to accept that their family member lost their footing and fell over a railing, and now they're never going to be seen again.
Yeah, accidents and suicides are very hard. I mean, it's hard to accept, and I have seen people deny that their loved one is deceased even when it's under natural circumstances. But accidental and suicides, I mean, people will look for somebody to blame or something to blame, or it's not true. And I agree with you on that, but I'm telling you, these photos of her from that website are very compelling. Very compelling to me. So I don't know. I would be interested to hear what our listeners think, what their opinions are. So please email us at truecrimeoutloud@gmail.com. Let us know your opinion on the Amy Bradley case. Digging into it yourself some more. There are several shows on this. It's been on Disappeared, Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted. Let us know what you think.
It is an intriguing case. And as an interesting side note, the very first cruise that I took, I was walking around the ship and they had a case where like awards for the ship were and everything, you know, like where the ship receives awards for things. And in that case was an award that this cruise ship had gotten for picking up a lone swimmer adrift in the Gulf of Mexico. So,
oh, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so it's possible. You know, this guy's by himself. He had fallen off another ship. And from what I could determine on that, once I saw that, obviously I was very intrigued. And what I could determine was that the ship happened upon him floating alive. So it's possible.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this week's case. And as always, we'll see you next week. We would like to hear your thoughts on this and all of our cases, and as always, you can reach us by email at truecrimeoutloud@gmail.com, Facebook and Instagram at truecrimeoutloud. Out loud is 2 words, not one, and Twitter at TCOutloud.
Photos, links, and sources for this case can be found on our website at www.truecrimeoutloud.com.